So Minnesota, like I said, is a pretty kind of a white state. It's pretty liberal. It's what you would consider a blue state and things like that. And because of that, the current administration, really had us in the crosshairs. And also because our governor ran for vice president under Kamala Harris. And so basically, that put us really in the crosshairs. And so the things they were trying to do in this state with federal agents, um, you know, they're going to try to tell you it's because we had all this fraud and all this stuff. The reality is that we have significantly less fraud here than has actually happened at the federal government level with the current administration. Um, but the bottom line is that like I said, they came after us because they wanted to, bully up on our uh, state and on our city. And of course, this attacks on our city has been going on for a long time anyway, because even after the murder of George Floyd, these kind of right wingers like to characterize our state as like, or our city, Minneapolis is burning, this kind of stuff. So it's just, it's garbage attacks on us, but it was really for retaliation because of walls and because of you know the basically being a blue state. And so what ended up happening is that the feds were already looking pretty hard at our state back in December. And then some character, what I call a social media slop agent, Nick Shirley, came to town and decided to kind of advance this whole nonsense about fraud, and particularly to try to lay fraud on the heels of our Somali neighbors, even though in reality the person who ran the whole fraud scheme, and there was a fraud scheme that happened, no question, but the person that ran it was a white woman. And they never managed to, mention that. And so instead, what we had was all this Nick Shirley character showing up to daycares after hours and when they weren't open and so forth. And oh, look, they don't have any children enrolled and blah blah and all these dumb, stupid things like that. And because these MAGA types, want some reason, they were buying right into it, and that really brought down ICE on our Somali neighbors. I mean, they were already kind of, you know, starting to focus on this, but that really brought that's what opened up Operation Metro Surge. It was also aided and abetted by our police chief, who basically announced in an interview that the problem with crime and the perpetrators of crime in our city are Somali youth, which is could not be further from the truth. It is absolutely a lie. And then when people raised the fact that it was a lie and objected to it, basically his response was, "Oh, not I'm sorry I said that, but oh, I'm sorry you misunderstood what I said." So basically trying to blame the listeners rather than his own ridiculousness. And that sort of between that and that Nick Shirley thing really got the current administration to pay attention to our city, and and that's when all of this stuff started raining down. But what they didn't know, and I'm going to finish up real quick here because I think whatever everybody else has to say is way more interesting than what I've got to say. But what they didn't know is that we have a long history in this town of working together and organizing. We had a very good dress rehearsals previously in the aftermath of the killing of Jamar Clark and the killing of George Floyd and so forth. And so we had a good kind of basis and knew each other and knew how to work together very, very well before they got here. And so from that, we were able to really spring into action to make those plans to defend our neighbors. And so with this, I wanted to kick the conversation over. I was gonna Nakima, do you know if Jaylani is on
Yeah,
yet?
she's on.
Oh, okay, great, because I didn't see him. So I wanted to kick it over to Jaylani and then to Ted to talk a little bit about the impact of these things on our neighbors and how people coordinated together to really take on these, the attacks on the Somali community in particular. So Jaylani and Ted.
I will let Jaylani go first.
Put me on the spot. Well, thanks, Michelle. I guess, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's known publicly, because I think we kind of became a center of this important discussion. However, what probably most people who don't know about Minnesota should know is that we were well organized because of the murder of George Floyd and and I think that was an epic center to some extent, meaning that the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic during that time, we were simmering toward a community that's a kind of awakening, and the work that Michelle and her group have done, and the other groups that you'll hear about were kind of a culmination of that resistance that was taking place in the Twin Cities long before this moment. And so this incredible moment after the murder of George Floyd was, I think it allowed for the larger context of the work to kind of surface. And I think to connect the dots of police brutality and make it an international issue was critical. And the organizing that took place on the ground, and also I think a sense of the burden that many folks here in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities felt were critical for the moment that would eventually come 6 years later, and with the ICE raids here. And but I think taking a step back, all of this is kind of part of this ongoing attack and surveillance of our communities. So even before, during this time in 2014, and even beyond that, uh, particularly the community, one of the communities I work with is a Somali American community, and they became a target of the FBI. The FBI targeted this community, created several programs nationally to target the community, to surveil them. We actually had a FBI whistleblower. When you get a chance, I'll put it in the comment section there, about Terry Aubrey, who's a former FBI agent, who talked about the disdain that the FBI agents had for the Somali American community, and how this law enforcement agency was targeting Somali Americans disproportionately, and also violating their constitutionally protected rights, and keeping ongoing investigations. It's a pretty interesting read about his testimony, and particularly what made him to kind of be a whistleblower, and to kind of no longer be part of that administration. So Minnesota has kind of historically been this test subject by the federal law enforcement. And so to take you to kind of January of 2025, I think we knew that the Trump administration would target Minnesota, and in fact I think I had a PowerPoint slide where um, I included some of the factors of the first administration, where we saw Trump targeting Congresswoman Omar for being Muslim, and there was a potential possibility. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know that round two of that fight was coming. Now, with the caveat that we saw this fraud story that has been overblown, and again, it's deeply rooted in the same type of welfare fraud type of language that has been used against people of color in this country for a long time. We know how crime is weaponized to target Black people. That's always been the case. And again, that fraud case kind of became the center of this fight. And then eventually we saw this demonization of the Somali community, which led to the first 400 being announced to be sent over here. And then after that, I think initially what we saw was that they were not happy with the results that they were having. And that was that many Somali Americans, I think over 90% of them are U.S. citizens or green card holders. So the fact that they were chasing people who actually had citizenship was again, Trump being Trump in the sense that, let's go get them, not knowing that they're also U.S. citizens. What are you going to do all day around driving around Cedar Riverside? And every time you catch somebody, they're either a U.S. citizen or, and that's the thing, the Department of Homeland Security already knew that. They like that's they have the data. It's not like anyone who should know it's them, but it didn't matter. So they would go to restaurants and walk and ask everybody in the restaurant if they're a U.S. citizen. And then once when they got frustrated with that, they added more troops. And then obviously we saw the orchestrated, organized campaign with Nick Shirley's video, the blogger that came to the Twin Cities, and then that added more weight. Now you had even more attention toward kind of the law enforcement action in Minnesota, and then you saw the increase now by almost 2,000 plus agents. And it was very obvious that all of these agents were actually untrained. They were folks that were predominantly bounty hunters almost, the way they moved, the way they organized. And also, they were there to create chaos. And on top of that, I think they were also afraid of the Twin Cities. So the way they operated was out of fear in that they couldn't have a conversation with folks. They were so agitated to some extent, and doing this kind of hit and run. But it was also a charade. They brought their own bloggers that would go along with them. They were going to neighborhoods and community, and eventually, the murder of Alex Preddy and Renee Good took place. And then one of the other stories that is less known is the Julio Castillo's story, who was shot in North Minneapolis. That story didn't get the same notoriety, partially because North Minneapolis is an area that has been historically disfranchised because it has a large African American population historically for a long time. And so anything that happens there has this a significant overshadow of what I would say, policing that took place and abuse of community there for a very long time. And so almost you can get away with certain things. Police officers can get away with certain type of behavior in North Minneapolis because of the historical underserving, over policing, in North Minneapolis that have existed, and also the weaponization of crime in that community. So when that incident took place, they almost felt like in this neighborhood, they can almost get away with a lot more. And eventually later we find that the two officers or two ICE agents in that particular lied, and they're actually the ICE admitted that they lied and put them into some sort of administrative or process. But as we're speaking to you today, and I'll kind of wrap up with this, there still has not been charges for those two cases. There it seems to be that there's not something coming up. It was very interesting today just to watch the Senate confirmation hearings, which is interesting that even this candidate who seems to be less educated, completely just the AWOL. Even Kristi Noem was kind of a weird in her own way, but this guy is almost even a bigger violent person who has a history of violence, calling for violence, celebrating violence, and is now responsible for leading one of the largest departments in the country. So it's a very interesting time. I think I will just want to give some credit. I think we were, like as I said, we were a lot more organized in the way we responded, and the work that was done by the groups that you're going to hear again a little bit more about. I want to just give a shout out to the folks that have been protesting on the ground and pushing on the ground. I think one of the unique things you'll hear about TED and JFA, but like having a system, a structure created during the George Floyd, I would say uprising, helped us in this moment because we didn't have to recreate a lot of this. We were not at infancy. We just had a capacity issue. Literally, we're just building capacity, but we had those systems in place and the organizing that was existing. And so, and I think a lot of people, I think thought that, they thought that this was a 72-hour hold. They thought this was a 2-week thing. This was, but we knew it's going to only increase significantly. So So sorry, my daughter decided to join us. But as you could tell, we were organized, and I think we need to be in this moment. There seems to be a lot of folks focused on this moment, that there is a cool down, which is kind of what's happening right now, but something could happen again. And so I think that we've got to wither our way through the next 2.5 years now to until this administration has to have some sort of reckoning in the ballot box. But I think this is a moment, a lesson to be learned, and Minnesota was poised to respond significantly in this moment in a unique way. I think it was because of all the things that have happened. And also, I think, we are a passive aggressive, weird kind of people. Many of you know us, like but the more passive aggressive, the more you push us, the more we feel like we have to do something about it. And so tremendous pushback that happened here. And I think now also we're trying to see how we can leverage this incredible network and system that we have to really dive into the idea of police accountability. I think people continue to dismiss the idea of police brutality. They continue to dismiss the idea that this doesn't happen. We had cameras, we had phones. These strategies that people are using in ICE were actually being used during the time of George Floyd. It was because of the video that was recorded by those bystanders that helped us have this moment of tremendous response. And because of that strategy was embedded and cleared as a strategy that any average person can be, the concept of an observer for ICE agents was already inbred from because of the fact that people were observing. And that still happens when there is a police action. People feel a sense of urge to pull their phones out and almost kind of like hold it out and see what this action is. Even just to see when a police officer pulls somebody over, people are a lot more willing to think a little bit more about what does the situation look like and how can I have a role in maybe either de-escalating or documenting. And I think these are some of the big wins that we have that I think sometimes we don't take for granted. And I think we need to continue to encourage and train our folks and our people to realize that we can do a lot more by speaking up. And so with that, I'll turn it over back to Michelle. If they take it from there, or Ted. But it is that time for me to break fast today, so I'll be eating and listening in the background. So, but
thank you so much for being here, Jaylani. I
oh,
appreciate
no
you so
problem, no
much.
problem.
I really
Absolutely,
appreciate you.
absolutely.
So, I think Jaylani raised important, points because people were busy with their phones and with their whistles. With our phones and our whistles, we defended our community. We'll talk probably a little bit later about the role of the police, which was to pretty much abandon the community, and people are pretty upset about that. But I'm eager to turn this over to Ted, because Ted did a lot of organizing with Jaylani and with the Somali community and other communities, and he also played a really important role when Jake Lang thought he was going to slide into our town and create some chaos. And I think he got taught a lesson. So, Ted, let me throw that over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so Justice Frontline Aid, we provide support for the fight against repression in a variety of ways, providing support for protests, providing training. So we came out of the George Floyd uprising, kind of about these kinds of things. I do want to say, starting off, that like what Chris is going to talk about later, the incredible network of responders that we had here, that just started off organically and rapidly organized and figured out how to address the attacks on our community, was incredible and essential to what folks were doing. For folks who are not in the Twin Cities, I don't know how to convey the depth of the impact, how much fear there was in our communities, how even weeks after Metro Surge was supposedly over, you would walk into a mercado and there would be practically no people there and no food, because why stock food if no one's coming in to buy it? Restaurants closed, or having to have someone monitor their door and let people in one at a time to make sure that ICE isn't coming in. Just devastating. And I think that people will be recovering from that for a long time. I think folks have talked about the shootings and murders that happened, as long as we're talking about these things, I want to bring up a case where they killed a child. They killed an infant child. The child was saved and came back to life. But there was a family driving by the shooting that Jaylani referenced. They were not protesters, they were not observers, they were just people driving through their neighborhood. And an ICE officer shot a tear gas grenade under their car and filled their car with gas. And the entire family was harmed, and the child was killed. And that sort of thing, just attacking random people, beating up, grabbing a citizen and beating them up and dragging them somewhere and dumping them, like those sorts of things happen everywhere. It was just complete insanity for everyone in the metro area. So yeah, organizing the history that we had here around organizing protests, I think was really important for this. Sometimes we have people who will complain that having a protest or a march is just performative and it's not doing enough. But what it does is it provides an entry point for people to get involved in activism. It keeps the flames burning between these big events. It gives an opportunity to train people and get people familiar with the skills that we needed during this. When Renee Good was shot, there was a large vigilant protest at the site that night, scheduled over a small number of hours, and we managed to have a large, effective, safe protest with a lot of logistical and political problems. Frankly, we could do that because we've had people organizing, training, working together, networking, and used to being out in the street dealing with crowd control, cops, agitators, whatever comes with the territory. I am incredibly proud of the work that we got to do with Cedar Riverside. I want to call out the CRPA, the Cedar Riverside Protectors, who were patrolling all the time throughout because Cedar Riverside, if you don't know the cities, Cedar Riverside is a very large Somali community, and was targeted by ICE and by outside agitators, and was threatened. When Jake Lang was coming down, he was going to march on Cedar Riverside and burn a Koran. Obviously, that didn't happen. Other things happened, but there were incredible people doing that. The Cedar Riverside Alliance developed a group that not only helped coordinate the patrolling and the protecting of the community, but also created kind of a mutual aid network. So when a very large apartment building had flooding, they were able to organize for that, which I think this is a model. This is something that Michelle and Chris and I have talked about too. This is a model going forward, I think, where we can use these networks we've developed for mutual aid or for other forms of community protection. And I think that's really, really important and hopefully part of a better future. Organizing with Cedar Riverside to keep them safe, and then directly to address when there were threats of outside right-wingers to come in and create incidents and do harm there, is something that I love that my JFA partner Clean and I, our friend and comrade David from DSA and Bree from BRAP, got to be part of that. Help do things like bring in and program walkies and get marshals from protests out in the streets, so that if we needed to do something like say redirect traffic, that we had people, we're used to taking cars and blocking traffic for protests, so we could do it for other things as well. That was something that was disappointing with the MPD. The community really wanted some sense of protection when Jake Lang was in town to keep Cedar Riverside safe. It was stated that Cedar Riverside would be attacked, and the MPD was basically like, well, call us if there's a problem. So the community took care of that, and a bunch of protest marshals and other folks came in to help support the protectors and the responders. And that was quite a moment. Um, Obviously, we threw a lot of protests, and having that network of people who can plan a protest. Protests don't just happen. There are people weighing risks and making choices and planning routes and figuring out security and safety. Having those people, having the marshals, having sound equipment and people who can operate it, all these things in place so that we could quickly pull together what turned out to be like 100,000 person marches that happened over that. We had those capabilities because coming out of the George Floyd uprising more recently, and really the Philando and Jamar Clark uprisings previously, we had those resources, those relationships, that knowledge to do that. Um, uh, yeah, I don't want to talk too much. I will leave that there, and if folks can ask questions later if they want to. Thank you, everyone.
Well, actually, Ted, I do want to get you to talk about one thing that I think people will love to hear about, which is more about what happened with old Jake Lang when he showed up in town thinking he was going to get away with, he's walking around with a Quran with bacon in it, thinking he's going to play some game, and didn't turn out so well for him, did it? So I think people would love to hear that, and especially the kind of strategy that people had about trying to isolate things downtown so he and his crew never got to the Cedar Riverside, never were able to cross the bridge over to Cedar Riverside. So I think people would love to hear that story. I think it's a great
Sure. Yeah, because I forget that folks who aren't here probably don't realize like everyone around town knew about that day. But yeah, again, he was in town and he was planning to have a big, xenophobic, racist rally downtown, and was then going to march in the extreme cold to Cedar Riverside, which kind of demonstrated that he wasn't real familiar with the terrain, shall we say, because that would be a long, very cold walk. Um, but yeah, it did not turn out that way. There was so much work done. We had so many people coordinating patrols and protecting around Cedar Riverside. There were anti-fascists who were preparing a blockade in a different part of downtown so that if he did march on Cedar Riverside, that they would be a barrier between him and them. And then there was the large counter protest downtown. And there were so many organizers and so many leaders involved in making that happen. I can't quickly give everyone credit, but there was a lot of coordinating and a lot of work. The goal was with that counter protest, you don't want it to turn into, we don't police protesters. First off, that's something that we train people to. We're not the protest police. We're not telling people how to protest. At the same time, we don't want we don't want Jake lying like put in a coma on our watch. It's going to be terrible for press. It's a moral concern. It's a legal concern. So you don't want it to get completely out of hand, but you do want the community to have the opportunity to express themselves. And I feel like that was what was accomplished with that protest. And you can look at video of it, and he starts off very aggressive and very smug, and we had community members holding things up so that he couldn't broadcast what he was saying. People had water balloons in below zero weather in Minnesota. And that was this bizarrely effective tactic. But he ultimately was escorted out by people allegedly on our side to keep him safe and chased all the way to his hotel. Someone ended up with he had like this Timu fake plate carrier vest that had infidel written on it. Someone pulled that off of him. He just ended up basically scurrying away. But for everyone working that day, all the marshals, all the various community leaders, it was a real challenge. Early on, it looked like MPD SWAT was going to come down on the community and, probably beat and arrest everyone. And keeping that balance where it wasn't so aggressive that the police stopped the protest, but that people could express their outrage effectively was a real challenge. And that is something that, all the incredible marshals we have in the Twin Cities, all the incredible organizers we have are just incredibly well versed at doing. I do just want to make one side comment on that whole event. Going into that, and I'm honestly suspicious of this. I think that these were probably kind of centrist forces who don't like protests and are scared that, oh, if we anger Trump, Trump's going to crack down on us. And so I think that they kept pushing this narrative, and then people on the internet do what people on the internet do. They would repeat it. So people started saying, oh, the Somali community does not want you to protest. Don't go to this protest. Stay away from downtown, whatever you do. And I just want to comment on that because when you see stuff like that, please tell your friends, know yourself. If there's a protest planned and you tell people not to go to it, you are making it dangerous. Because if no one shows up and it's just a small group, they're vulnerable. So we had to scramble the entire community to make sure that people understood that no, the Cedar Riverside community was not against people protesting downtown. They were against people protesting in Cedar Riverside, and that had all been organized, between organizers and the Cedar Riverside community, and that was no problem. No one was going to protest there because we were all working together. But there was support, and Jaylani, who just spoke, Jaylani put out a video saying, what the parameters were. Do go downtown and protest if you are inclined to do so. And we still had kind of these allegedly well-meaning white liberals spreading this narrative of don't go to the protest. And, that really could have changed it. Jake Lang could have had a victory downtown and then gone to Cedar Riverside and created an incident for the community if people had believed that narrative rather than over time getting convinced that Jaylani's video mattered and they should listen to the Somali community about Somali issues, not some random folks on the internet. So we got there, and that was great. But keep that in mind. What you're sharing impacts people in activism and politics. And now I will be quiet again. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ted. That was great. And I wanted to just tell people too, the day that Renee Good was murdered by ICE, that day within about, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, something like that, there was a call for a rally, and you literally almost couldn't get to the rally. There were so many people in the street. The street was packed. I think there was in the neighborhood of 15,000 people on very, very little notice. I remember because I spoke at that rally, and so did Nikema, and it was just important that we came together as a community that particular night because it was so horrific what had happened right there in the neighborhood. So, it matters that we've been doing this stuff, and I think getting that kind of a turnout also shows that people really care about this. So I thought that was really important. And so thank you for that. And we want to hear now from Chris. Chris was heavily involved in the Rapid Response Network. And in that Rapid Response Network, 34,000 people in the state of Minnesota were trained to be what people are calling constitutional observers, which involved, getting out there with your cell phone and your whistle and letting people know what was going on, and in some cases following. We called people travelers, following the ICE agents to alert other people, and that kind of stuff. And so he was heavily involved in that, both as someone who went to the scenes where ICE was, as well as being a dispatcher. So I'm going to turn this now over to Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I am a dad and a PTA president for a school that serves the north side of Minneapolis, and that's kind of what got me pulled into the response. I was driving my kids to school one morning, and I got a text that one of our parents from our school had been abducted that morning. And that kind of hits you really, really hard. We collect others on this group, others on this call, other presenters have just done an amazing job organizing a cross-racial coalition of organizations up to and then after the George Floyd murder. And because we had that cross-racial and like the fact that just any random person in Minneapolis, when they see the cops pull somebody over, you stop and you start to film because like it's in our bones. We had started to do trainings on constitutional observing and this whistle system that we had learned from Chicago. And there was a couple of nonprofits focused on that, Unitas and Monarcha, and they had set up a text tree to send out that if there was a ICE scene, they'd send out a text and then people would go. That first started getting deployed in December. There was a big raid in St. Paul where the St. Paul police broke their own policies and gassed. They're not supposed to help ICE. They ended up going in and helping ICE and gassing the crowd quite liberally. We got so good at responding to those things that ICE realized they had to move faster. And so ICE was just starting to grab people off the street, and the text message system wasn't working anymore. And so what we did is we pivoted to the signal chats. And initially they were just open. I mean, you would go into a coffee shop, there'd be a QR code, you could get the signal chat and hop on. That worked till about the Renee Good murder, when we started getting infiltrated by fascists from around the country, and then they would spam the groups with horrific images to try to get people to leave. These signal chats, when there was 400 to 500 people from DHS here, the way the signal chats would work was one thing, and then it adapted when there was 3,000. When there's in that 400 range, you would go out driving. If you had to drive across town, you'd hop on a signal chat, a call, and you would just talk and keep an eye out on what was going on, or there were people doing zonal patrols. When things got really hot and heavy in that first week of January through February, we literally had dispatchers for different quadrants of the city. And we would have, like, South Minneapolis had a dispatch, and they'd have different patrol zones. North Minneapolis, we had a dispatch. We could hand things off between them through different signal chats. But we had this infrastructure so that each part of the city could adapt to what they needed in their part. Now, as things are quieting down, we're struggling because that labor-intensive system isn't working anymore. It's hard to get people out patrolling if they're only going to, we only saw ICE in North Minneapolis once last week. Abductions are still happening, but they're happening further out into the suburbs and such. And so we need to adapt again and maybe more of like the Monarcha type response, like we were using with the text messages or something like that. The patrollers, it was amazing to watch. I took 3 weeks off work to do this full time, to do dispatch full time, because we were having trouble getting coverage in North. We had dozens of people out there every day. At one point, we had more people out there on average than the police department. And they were all volunteers, and they were armed with whistles. And we made it so that instead of one ICE agent abducting one person per day, it took 18 ICE agents to abduct one person. Our response time in South Minneapolis was under 2 minutes. Our response time in North Minneapolis was 7 minutes. Just South Minneapolis, North Minneapolis has more African American Black families, also has immigrants, but it's not. It wasn't quite as targeted as South, as densely, all sorts of reasons. But North, like Metro-wide and North, we were at 7 minutes. Compare that to the police department has an 8.5 minute response time on average. So we were getting a volunteer out there with a whistle, and you could just watch the ICE agents die inside when the whistle showed up. And that was so, it was amazing to just watch how disheartening there were. And the second they hit anywhere, like the second a car stopped or they pulled over, people just came out of their homes and were making noises. Then we started to adapt, and we would just use remote horn alarms on cars, so people didn't even have to come out of their homes, and they could make the noise. They ended up having like hot spots they like to hit, and so we'd have some stationary people on the signal calls to keep us updated on what was happening. The other resource that we used, we created a license plates database, and we kept track of license plates. We could query it in a number of different ways, but it was a decentralized database, and we could say, okay, yeah, that vehicle was spotted as ICE 2 or 3 days ago in St. Paul, and now it's over here. They started to have to switch their license plates frequently, or driving without license plates, but if they drive without a license plate, that made it easy to see them. I mentioned it's been a little bit hard to kind of transition out of that. The population of people patrolling, a huge range of ages, but a lot of us were are neurodiverse. It was like you would hear the chief or the mayor talk about outside agitators or anarchists, and like the patrollers were anarchists. I mean, they were the queerest, non-binary, gender non-conforming. Like, it was the anarchists that were leading this, with like combined with local democratic consultants. I mean, like a younger, but like James Carville was the Minneapolis version of James Carville was out there patrolling. Yeah, whole thing. I won't get too much into that, but it was this huge coming together, and the patrolling was very separate from the mutual aid. You had to pick a lane early on, because if you were patrolling, ICE knew who your car was, and you never wanted it to go to a vulnerable person's home. And so we created a network of mutual aid. We created a network of patrolling. And there's all of these signal chats. There's something like 30,000 people. So we had about 34,000 people go through the constitutional training, an overlapping population, but not the exact same. There's about 30,000 people in these signal chats. They top out at about 1,000. And so there's these nested chats all across the city. So when the city council had to, right now, we are trying to get an eviction moratorium, an eviction extension, so that we have 60 days to get people's rents paid instead of 30. When the mayor vetoed that, I went into a chat with 250 people, and we had a meeting set up with our city councilwoman and had 10 people there, not pre-organized, not like it gives us this opportunity to do instant organization, because you're in a text thread with a bunch of these other people, and then there's crosstown connectors. Yeah, I can leave it there, and happy to answer any questions when we get to that point.
And I just want to mention, and I think the way that you framed it up is really good, Chris. One of the things we talk about a lot is hyper local organizing.
Yeah.
So every single one of these neighborhood areas, North Side, whatever, Harrison, whatever neighborhood it was, had a rapid response chat, had an organizing chat just to talk about things that weren't immediate, and have a mutual aid chat. And so people could talk about, and you're right, there was a kind of a different people picked different lanes. And the mutual aid was all about, like, there's a family over here that can't go grocery shopping. Can we bring them some groceries? Or they need their kid taken to school, or they need a ride to work. So mutual aid was one kind of lane. The rapid response was another kind of thing. We do have a lot of mutual aid that is working really hard right now to raise rent money for a lot of
Yes.
people. And the city supposedly is going to pony up $1 million also. toward people's rent. But then the idiot mayor of ours did not want to extend the, an eviction moratorium to give people, enough money to get the rent. So, and get it to the landlords. And it was interesting because the city council meeting on this, something like 200 people spoke in favor of the moratorium, and only like about 10 spoke against it. But, of course, our mayor, because he's so in bed with the developers, and that's where he goes. But anyway, the bottom line is that that hyper local organizing in each of these little neighborhoods was tremendous. And then there was kind of organizing between each of those hyper local, organizing, where there was kind of more citywide type of organizing. People in the outstate area are trying to kind of do some of that as well, because things have moved to more of the rural areas with ICE now, because they just did not have good, unfortunately they did were successful snatching people, but not nearly as many as they thought they were going to get. And then they've moved out now to the outstate areas where they get a little bit, unfortunately, less resistance. Um, and I'll give you an example of something that happened in an outstate area, in one of the rural areas. ICE went and ate lunch at a restaurant, at a Mexican restaurant, and I think that was in Austin, Minnesota. They went and ate at this Mexican restaurant, and then as soon as they finished their lunch, they arrested everybody in the restaurant, all of the workers. So, I mean, you want to talk about sickening conduct, and this is what, kind of stuff they do, and in areas where it's not well organized. So, people do need to really pay attention and get organized. And with that, I want to bring forward one of the really strong, amazing organizers in the Twin Cities. I've had the pleasure to work with Nikema for a very long time now, and truly love and appreciate everything she does, because she is, like I said, just an amazing organizer, and organized some of the most important protests and press conferences that we have had during this whole entire ICE siege. And so with that, Nikema, I want to turn it over to you to talk about these other forms of resistance and also some of the legal defense that's going on right now.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. So, as we have been discussing, Minnesota definitely showed up and showed the people that an invisible army has been forming over many years of organizing and protesting. Our movement for police accountability, I would say, started officially in 2014 after Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. We had marched before that after Trayvon Martin was killed. And of course, we've been building that momentum ever since with the multiracial coalition fighting for justice, fighting in the freezing cold during the 18-day occupation after Jamar Clark was killed by Minneapolis police in November of 2015. And, the world finally saw what we had been trying to convey for many years in terms of the abuse at the hands of law enforcement and government cover-ups when George Floyd was killed in 2020. And so I believe that all of that energy and momentum played a huge role in us being able to take on ICE, push them back, push back the federal government, and begin to see them falling like dominoes. Because trust me, when I saw that Kristi Noem was fired from her position at DHS, I was cackling and celebrating all day. I'm a woman of faith, and I've been praying ever since I saw her behavior, her cruelty, lying on those who have been killed in Minnesota. And so I was happy to see her go down in that situation. She was the one who announced our arrests for those of us who were a part of the city's church protest. Again, her arrogance, going on X, going on News Nation and saying arrests were imminent. And I'm like, now they're looking at you criminally, boo. They're looking at you lying. It shouldn't have taken her embarrassing Trump for her to be removed. She should have been gone once she started showing that she was never qualified for the job to begin with. Because I did research on her background, saw she was not qualified at all to take on the role of DHS. And so what it illuminates is that you have so much hypocrisy coming from the federal government, right? Donald Trump waged war against diversity, equity, and inclusion from the moment that he got into office, trying to cast doubt on the credibility and qualifications of people of color. Meanwhile, his whole cabinet and many of the people surrounding him are unqualified or underqualified. There might be some who are, but the vast majority, from my perspective, are not. And they're wreaking havoc on American society. So to see her gone, and I just read yesterday, Bovino, who thought that he was G.I. Joe walking through Target, is now supposedly retiring at the end of the month. That's domino number 2, and more to come. I'm really happy to see them being uprooted from those positions, but I will be happier when I start seeing federal charges against them after Trump is no longer in office. Because if there were federal charges now, we know he would do just like the January 6ers, their acts of sedition and tyranny and all the things that they did. He pardoned them, as he has done many, folks who are on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of the law. So we got to wait, right? But we can continue to hope and persevere, challenge their false narratives, and challenge the media. And I would say, in terms of Minnesota, there is something special here. I've known since 2010 that Minnesota was the next battleground for civil rights. That's why I'm still here. Because initially, I moved here in 2003 and I said, look, it's too white and too cold. However, I knew just in my spirit that this is the path that we were headed down in terms of our fight for civil rights and racial justice. But I also want to give honor to all of those who organized in the decades before our movement began. I feel like we've been able to pick up a lot of the energy from anti-war protesters, just people who, even during the civil rights movement, people who sat at lunch counters in Minnesota that were segregated and fought back. The Native community, fighting back. I mean, just on and on. There's such a rich history here of taking on the government, taking on the system, organizing the people. And this has been across many, many, many decades. And I don't think people have appreciated it until now, right? But I guess it's better late than never. But I'm very happy to see that energy. And I would say that it's in that spirit that we, as what we're calling, I guess, the city's church protesters, went into that church during Dr. King weekend and essentially held up a banner of righteousness and calling out the hypocrisy of David Easterwood, who is a pastor at City's Church, also serving as the regional director for ICE. So the person overseeing the brutal conduct, the murderous conduct, the violent conduct, the unconstitutional conduct of these ICE agents, and trying to justify their conduct, claiming in a lawsuit that had been filed by the ACLU that there wasn't evidence that he saw of constitutional violations, is saying that it was the fault of protesters who were being aggressive. So we went into that church. I wanted to know, how is someone serving as a pastor and also overseeing this brutal conduct? It is not in alignment with my faith as a Christian woman and as an ordained reverend. And you all see for us taking a righteous stand as a multicultural force for justice, that the federal government has attempted to criminalize us and to target us in order to appease Donald Trump's MAGA base, full of, unfortunately, racist and white supremacists. And I know firsthand because of, the targeting that we each received, well, many of us, in terms of online attacks, people sending racist and violent emails and death threats. I mean, and these are people supposedly defending a church, right? Which is just really sad. And it just shows you how dark this group is and who they are connected to. And meanwhile, you know, we're looking at what's happening with white Christian nationalists as well, right? Who are being recruited to join ICE. They're the ones going to the White House and laying hands on Donald Trump, claiming that the war in Iran is a holy war. And so the hope is that more people who are genuinely of faith will see this and call it out and raise concerns about it. You know, the church that we went into is a Southern Baptist church in St. Paul. And if you know the history of Southern Baptists, they were united initially with Northern Baptists, but in 1845, there was a debate about whether they would continue to support slavery. And the Southern Baptists wanted slavery to continue. So they split from the Northern Baptists. They later apologized, but City's Church is a Southern Baptist church, you know, and they're connected to these people in positions of power who are connected to Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration. So that has been either an invisible or hidden or less talked about thread in all of this in terms of the spiritual warfare and the evil that is undergirding a lot of the actions and activities and cruelty that is coming from the Trump administration. So I appreciate the fact that we took a stance and stood up against the federal government. And there are, you know, at least 39 of us, you know, we'll see what happens. But we're fighting for our freedom, fighting for the right to protest, fighting for the rights of journalists as well who were targeted. We know of at least 3 independent journalists. Of course, Georgia Ford, our hometown independent journalist, Brixton Hughes, a hometown independent journalist, and then Don Lemon, a national independent journalist. And that is yet another attack on the free press, which goes hand in hand in all of this. And you all probably know I've dealt with the media for a very long time. However, in this particular fight, I'm seeing a whole other angle to the media. So when we would be focused on, let's say, policing cases, for example, we would constantly call out the fact that the media right away would take the narrative of law enforcement and they would take the narrative of the city and they would run with that. And it would essentially lead to a cover up of a police killing. And this same pattern happened time and time and time again. Finally, with George Floyd, they got caught with their pants down. And what we have to understand, as Jaylani was saying, it was the power of the people that made that happen. Number one, the video of the bystanders who actually stayed out there witnessing and calling out the police, the video by Darnella Frazier. But then taking it a step further, there was a woman named Ashley Quinones, whose husband, Brian, had been killed by the Edina and Richfield Police Department years earlier. She was the person who first tagged me and a handful of other activists that day to say Minneapolis police killed someone by choking them or crushing their throat. And when she tagged us, I looked online, I saw nothing, and checked with Madeira Redondo, who was the chief at the time, and he was under the impression that Minneapolis police had dealt with someone who had a medical emergency who passed away, but was not aware that the officers actually did what they did to murder George Floyd. So we have to understand the power of the people in that situation. How many individuals, ordinary, average citizens who saw something, who intervened, who said something, who documented, who took it to social media, and every step of the way got their information to the people so that we would be positioned to push back and rise up. And as you all know, it became the site of the largest uprising in world history, from my understanding, right here in the Twin Cities. And so I don't know what Donald Trump and his minions were thinking when they came here, because God used us as the last line of defense so that this entire country did not slide completely into authoritarianism. Because many folks assumed ICE is just an immigration issue. And that is how it's been framed for many, many years. But once this ICE invasion happened here, not only did folks across different backgrounds, and especially a lot of our folks from white communities, taking instruction and leadership from our immigrant organizers and leaders, rise up and defend their neighbors. But us as Black civil rights activists saw our space where we could show up because we had taken on law enforcement and the government for so many years. We are the descendants of people who were treated like what we saw happening to our immigrant communities, where we've experienced police officers, historically as slave catchers, coming in and doing some of the same things without there being documentation and without there being any accountability, dehumanizing people. And so as Black organizers, we saw the same playbook and we said, we got to stand up and defend our neighbors because we know the game already. We already know their playbook, and we can rise up and help speak truth to power on behalf of our immigrant neighbors and stand for our humanity. So again, that's what we did in City's Church. That's what everybody did day in and day out, taking to the streets, marching in freezing cold weather. I mean, we're one of the few places that was able to show freezing cold weather can be your friend when it comes to those trying to invade your territory, right? Ice versus ice, right? And we're well skilled at being out in the cold and standing up and defending ourselves. So and then to think about our Native American community, people setting up teepees, calling on the ancestors, right? I mean, I get excited about it, right? Because again, they thought we were going to fold and be afraid of them. But think about the power of our communities across the board. Norwegians standing up like, no, our ancestors might have fought in the Union Army. So here we go again, standing up for what is right, right? Our Hmong community. So it's just, so when I think about all of that, Donald Trump chose the right place for his foolishness. And we see the results, like I said, of them backing up, drawing down. It's not over, but they definitely got a taste of their own medicine. And now we're seeing the leadership shifts happen. And as they draw down, we still need to continue to put pressure on them for accountability, because I'm still waiting to see a single arrest of a single ICE officer who violated someone's constitutional rights, violated Minnesota laws, or killed somebody. And my spirit is not going to rest until we see that. I don't care what our elected officials say. They still need to be held accountable, Democrat or Republicans, because they failed us as a people. And I think it helped people to see behind the veil that they get up there on these platforms, they get elected to these positions, they talk these big talks, but when it comes down to it, what power did they have to protect the people? Zero. Like the title of this forum, we keep us safe. And that is what we demonstrated through this entire experience. So never again should people just put their trust in these elected officials. Even with these big marches, if I hear they got Tim Walter, I'm like, why? Why are you bringing these people? We don't need them to speak for us. We speak for us and we keep us safe. And that's the message that we need to embed in future generations so that they decrease their dependence on elected officials who do not stand for the people. And that they become, if they're going to get in these seats of power, they know what time it is, that we're expecting them to stand on business. And I would say, in addition to arrests, in addition to charges, in addition to prosecutions of these ICE agents and federal agents, we also need to see the charges dismissed against all of us who rose up during Operation Metro Surge. How is it that after helping to lead a nonviolent peaceful protest and spending the night in jail, that I was incarcerated longer than the 34 count felon sitting in the White House, who hasn't served a day in prison for his crimes? and his crimes are continuing to stack up daily, which is not right. So if this man can go from being a felon to being in the White House, then certainly Minnesota organizers, neighbors, and ordinary citizens can go from being freedom fighters to being completely free of any criminal charges. So that needs to continue to be a part of our platform, not just those of us who were a part of the city's church protest, but every single person who was charged with a felony or charged at the state or county level for rising up needs to have those charges dismissed because we deserve our freedom. They didn't fight for us, we fought for us, and we need to be protected. Thank you.
Ooh, amen to that. Absolutely. So one thing I want to let people know, and we are still working on, we have three kind of distinct sets of people that are facing charges. One group of people is people that protested down at the Whipple building, which is the federal building that ICE operates out of. And we have had, I can't even know the exact number, but 30 to 40 people that have been arrested on state charges, and we're working on defending those folks. Then we have about 22 people that have been arrested on federal charges as observers. And those federal defenses are pretty expensive. And I think they know that these charges are not going to stick, but they do it because it's a way to, deplete the movement of our resources. And then we have the third group of people, which is the group that Nikema led to do that extremely important protest at the city's church, to call out and to expose that their pastor at their church is the regional director of ICE. I mean, can you imagine this? Having that guy and he's over here, pretending to be a religious leader. I mean, what is going on here? So and he should be the one going to having some kind of prosecutions and going to prison. And you all should be lauded as the heroes you are. And so that's why we have to work very hard in this community. That's kind of the after work, even though, we still have ICE here. It's largely started to close down, but the kind of the after work that we still have to do, and we can't ever just let everybody go home, is we've got to make sure that we stand with people that have been arrested, and that we make sure that they all have attorneys and good, solid, quality legal defense. And so that's, the ongoing work. That's part of the ongoing work that we are doing together. And so that's, again, very, very important stuff.
And Michelle, can I just say real quick,
Please.
When I saw the people in Burlington, Vermont, I'm like, they took their lessons from Minnesota because they're showing up in mass and standing up against ICE.
Yes. Yes.
So that to me is just a powerful example of the work of the collective. And I believe it'll continue to spread. So kudos to Minnesota once again.
Absolutely. I do want to throw out one thing that's kind of funny. Look for those videos of ICE slipping on ice. We had an awful lot of fun with that. I got to tell you, there was one truck that came driving through at one point where he had like some tanks of water on the back of his truck, and he had like little leaks so that the water was just kind of going on the road. And because it was so cold here, it was freezing almost instantly. It was kind of pretty funny to see that and seeing these ICE agents like slipping and falling and doing, because they came here not knowing, they thought they were going to make big piles of money by attacking our people, and we had another plan for them. So that was, to me, I enjoyed that. So, and with that, I'd like to call up Toshira Garraway Allen, who runs the organization Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence. She is the fiance of Justin Tigan, who was murdered by the St. Paul police, and she works to support other families to get justice for all families dealing with the effects of police violence. And so I want to call her up because she also played an important role recognizing what has happened to families as a result of these attacks on our community by ICE and other federal agents. So Toshira, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me very well?
Yep, can hear you.
Oh, awesome. So first of all, I am very, very proud of my community, everyone that I have stood side by side with, that have stood up against the evil and the corruption once ICE arrived. But most of all, even before I showed up to Minnesota, as we all know, and as you guys have talked about, the murder of George Floyd that happened. But we also know that there was many more murders that happened prior to George Floyd and that happened after George Floyd was killed here in the state of Minnesota. And so we have been living in this state of terror right here in this state before the ICE agents even showed up. But as what was said before is, I don't know what Trump was thinking, because, you know, I think that it went different than how him and his administration thought it was going to go. Weirdly and oddly and strangely, he already seen how we stood up together in unity when George Floyd got killed. However, for whatever reason, it just seemed that he must have thought that it was going to go differently. But he's seen that, you know, injustice done to one of us is an injustice done to all of us. And quite frankly, we have our ups and downs in our movement, but at the end of the day, we form, I would say, a family, because I actually call it my movement family, you know. And so when they come here to attack our movement, to attack our immigrant communities, they're pretty much putting an attack on all of us, and then we all have to stand. And so sometimes, you know, I laugh. There's times I told Nakima before, I said, it's times when I get tired and she goes on out there and does it and does the damn thing, and many other people. And then there's times when I have the capacity and we just take turns where we might need our rest, but we are all standing up in solidarity and we are refusing to be quiet against white supremacy, and most of all, downright corruption and evil that's been in this state before I showed up. But then the real evil on a federal level of white supremacy showed up. But the effects that it has taken on our families, you know, when we seen Renee Good get murdered, and we seen Alex Preddy get murdered, it was nothing but it was re-triggering and re-traumatizing, because there's many of us living through the evilness and the cover-ups and watching everything that you guys seen them do to Alex Preddy and family, and seen them do to Renee Good's family. They have done to each and every one of our families. You know, after our loved ones are murdered, and I call it modern day lynched in the streets here in Minnesota, we not only have to fight for accountability for our loved ones, but then we have to turn around and fight for the dehumanizing of our loved ones, right? We have to fight to prove that they were a human being that actually deserve accountability and actually deserve justice. And the media plays a very huge part in that, because the media controls the message that gets out about what happened to our loved ones, right? And so I believe that the attacks that even happened to people like Georgia Fort, that was intentional, because Georgia gets the truth a lot of times here in Minnesota, instead of taking the mainstream media outlets narrative of what has happened to our loved ones. She digs a little deeper, and instead of just taking the police narrative of what may have happened in a certain circumstance, she will reach out to our loved ones. And I know that even for myself personally, what happened in the murder of Justin Tigan, the father of my son, the first media outlet that ever took an interest in hearing about Justin's story, specifically from our families, came from Georgia Fort and Nico. over there at Unicorn Riot. So there is no mistake of why these people specifically chose to go after certain media outlets intentionally so that they could silence them, quiet them, stop them from doing their jobs, things of that nature. And then even when prior to that, we had a situation in St. Paul where ICE came and brutalized the community in St. Paul, brutalized the media. They have harmed media outlets, broken people's legs, did all type of stuff, but it's all intentional. And what they're doing right now with trying to criminalize peaceful protesters that stood up against someone that was supposed to be loving God, but sitting there acting out some of the most heinous crimes in history. It's all a distraction, right? It's a distraction so that we don't focus on what's really at hand, and that's their corruption. It's the same thing that happens to our loved one. If they can say, oh, well, he was a criminal and he had parking tickets from 1992 and he jaywalked back in 1991. So he was a criminal and we didn't need him in our community anyway because he was a criminal. That is intentional because they want to distract and they want to manipulate people's minds to believe that we didn't need or this human being didn't deserve to live anyway. So we have to never ever take their narrative, never ever take mainstream media narrative of what happens when these people come out and modern day lynch people in our communities, re-traumatize families that are already hurting, that are already going through. We have to live and watch this stuff. My heart goes out to Renee Good family and to Alex Pretty's family because I live it, right? And other families live it. We live what they do to families and how they go after, like, for an example, how they went after Renee Good's fiance after they shot Renee in broad daylight. We watched it with our own eyes. This guy was tagging at his gun before Renee even went forward. He grabbed his gun at his holster as she was bagging up, okay? And then they go after her fiance. I've had it happen to me for speaking up against the injustices, the cruelty of other families, speaking up against the murder of the father of my son who they beat and threw in a garbage can. But for standing up for that, you get these media outlets, Bob Crow's wife, Liz Collins, who antagonize people in our movement, antagonize our families. Even after the murder of Dante Wright, seeing all that they wrote in about this young man on these media outlets, all of it is intentional to antagonize families that are already going through losing their loved one. And honestly, to me, it shouldn't even matter. Someone is dead. Someone is gone. And the only thing that you can think of about a human being is what you feel like they did wrong when they were alive. So that means that they deserve to die. That means that they deserve to get brutalized in the streets. So the evilness, it's like a never ending to it. And the only thing that we can do as human beings is continue to stand up against it, not attack each other, not inflict pain on each other, because we are going through enough pain from this corrupted system that has it out for all of us. intentionally has it out for all of us. They mean none of us no good. It's downright hatred. And white supremacy cares about no one. White supremacy doesn't even care about poor white people. In our group of families that are standing up, we have white people, Black people, Native people, Asian people. We have every walk of life that white supremacy has attacked and murdered brutally. And so it's going to take every last one of us from a Somali community. It's going to take every last one of us from every walk of life to say no more. Whether it is white people, good white people that say no more, whether it's Black people, whether it's Somali people, whether it's Asian people, we have to believe in our hearts. We have to move as such that an injustice done to one of us is an injustice done to all of us. And believing in our hearts that each and every one of the people that have lost their lives unjustly, let me tell you something. I lost the father to my child. And my child, I have to look at every day, every single day that doesn't have his dad. Thanks to the St. Paul Police Department that worked strategically to cover up his murder. But you want to know what? Justin life doesn't mean any more than George Floyd's life and Cordell Handy's life and Marcus Golden's life and Kobe Heisler's life and Courtney Williams' life. His life means no more because all of their lives mean no more than his life because all of their lives are equally important. And so we have to move as such that each and every ounce of blood that has been shed, Renee Good blood that has been shed, Alex Petty's life, his blood that has been shed, each and every one of their lives is just as important for us to stand up for and for people to be held accountable. And so my plan, once it is time and once I'm able to come back forward, is to hold marches and protests and press conferences because, as Nikema said, we need charges brought forward for each and every one of them, for Renee Good, for Alex Petty, and all the lives that were stolen by law enforcement before ICE even showed up. We need accountability for each and every one of them, and our souls should not rest until each and every one of them gets the accountability that they deserve. And I don't care if it was done back in 2009, 2015, 2001, they all deserve accountability. These people are living out in our community. They're going home to their families while we live without our loved ones, and it's not right, and they all deserve to be held accountable. Thank you. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toshira. I know that's hard to do, but thank you. You are so right about that. So I wanted to make sure that we have some time for people to ask questions and things, but I do want to transition for 1 second to talk about kind of like what's next. And what's next that we've identified are two things. One is we are absolutely going to defend every single person that has charges over that they're facing any type of charges. The 39 beautiful people that protested at the city's church, the 22 beautiful people or so that have federal charges because they were defending their neighbors, and the probably between 30 and 40 people who got arrested protesting at the Whipple building and other things by state charges. So we got that work in front of us to do. We have other work to do, including demanding justice, as Toshira just talked about, for Alex Preddy and Renee Good And golly, I'm gonna have trouble remembering his name because I always do. The gentleman that was shot in North Minneapolis, the Venezuelan man. So we've got to demand justice for them as well. And believe me, it is not easy. The federal government has basically put those people on a plane, got them away from the area, made it and won't share any information with our local prosecutors, though our county prosecutor, Mary Moriarty, has already said that she will, turn over every rock trying to prosecute these people on our state charges. And the good thing about prosecuting them if they get convicted on state charges is that the guy I call Felon 34 in the White House cannot pardon them. So we are going to be working very hard to get that to happen. So we've got that. And then the third thing we're working on is an expanded response network. So several of us have been meeting to try to find other ways to deal with community issues that don't involve the police, because I can tell you right now, most of the public officials and all of the police departments have utterly failed us. Either they participated with ICE and harmed us, or they ignored and allowed what ICE did to just happen without any recourse. And the Minneapolis police have been the worst ones of all. So basically, we never were trying to count on those police, but now it's even worse. And so we've got things that we're working on. We've got next steps, but I wanted to sort of stop here and give people a chance to ask any questions they have from this fabulous panel of people that spoke tonight, to which I thank you very much. I appreciate all of you and appreciate you having the chance to work with all of you. You're amazing people. Do we have questions? Because I can't hardly believe we don't.
Oh, questions. While questions are queuing up, I wanted to maybe just add a couple of things and raise them. First and foremost, I think this point that Michelle just mentioned about transition. So I think this is the time to start thinking about immigration reform in a really unique way. And so I think we need to figure a way for Minnesotans and that entire mobilized observers to now take a role in um, in helping us pass immigration reform in this country. And so I hope that am I frozen?
A little bit you are, but
I'm
there
back
you
now.
are. Yeah.
But I think it would be great that we pivot to that a little bit. I want to also be transparent that what we're seeing, particularly the way that the federal administration is targeting Somali Americans, is unique. So this past few months, particularly last 2 months ago, what they did is they're trying to figure out a way to deport as many Somalis as possible. So they're literally now violating all of the immigration laws that already are on the books. They went and tried to pull people who have been vetted for a long time and were in refugee camps and try to re-interview them. So they did that. Then which was a project called Paris, which thankfully just Thunheim just put a kibosh to it with a federal TRO. But what they're doing now also is in the federal government, because there's so many cases and there's not enough judges, everyone's case is based on when the case was submitted. So what they did in the past month is they pulled every single Somali case out of its line, meaning like if somebody had a case that they were going to be heard 2 years from now, well, it's happening now in April. So they pulled all of the cases. They selectively went and removed people from the queue, and they looked in the line to see who's Somali and literally pulled them to create a separate pathway for them. And they're putting them in front of judges that are harsh in order for those asylum cases to end. You saw the TPS program end technically today or Tuesday, but because of a lawsuit that we've been supporting and we're behind, is going through the Boston courts right now. It's put a halt on that. So I want us to also keep in mind that they also have locked the Whipple building from court observation. So where that used to be very common, now they're not allowing for people to go and observe court. So there are these other fights that we're having that maybe are not necessarily on the front line. So we need people to stay kind of more in the fight, and that would transition into how do we actually address this immigration problem long term. Pivoting back to policing, I think this is another opportunity. As much as we talk about immigration reform, we talk about police brutality and the trifecta, whether it's the federal ICE agents, whether it's the FBI, or whether it's local police. And we've seen what Hennepin County Sheriff has been doing to folks at Whipple. We have seen what MPD has been doing, particularly, and their lack of what they have been doing. And on top of that, we have seen what ICE has been doing. So this is an opportunity for all of those issues that have been surfaced with a larger population, a lot more people impacted by it, and a lot more people aware of it. For the first time, we haven't seen school districts take a role around police accountability and the role. And I think there's the fact that the ICE surge made so many different sectors of our society take notice and take the pain. I mean, I remember talking to someone who's part of the philanthropy community, and she was talking about her own personal story of how she was out there protecting her school. And I think that personal stories and those connections cannot dry up in this moment. It can't just be a phase that we went through. It has to actually transform us into that next moment. And I think that not everybody's going to continue on with us, but I think this is a time where we take that pain. And Chris, you reminded me of actually the conversation that I had with one of the business owners on Nicollet, who talked to me about what Alex did. So Alex was a full-time RN ICU nurse at the VA hospital. And before he was killed, he went part-time. He went part-time because he felt that there was just not enough people showing up and not enough people responding. And so he felt that he had to do more. And he had a very clearly plan of what he was doing. Not only that, but he was very intentional about stopping at the Latino and it's particularly even the Somali businesses, where eventually he was shot at in front of a Somali business right there. It's an adult daycare, and the owner of the building is actually Somali American. And I visited there, I think the day after the shooting, where the BCA was there, and the slugs were still in the building because the shots ricocheted out of that pavement into the building. So speaking of that, how much sacrifice people made to really do incredible work, and I think it's a testament of our community, a testament of all those people who stepped up. But I think, as you heard from Chris today, and I'm speaking to you today, it's a lot harder to help folks deal with. There's still a lot of people who are not comfortable driving alone, going to appointments. There's still people who are concerned about ICE. There's still people who are very vulnerable, and getting those not only just mutual aid, but we just need bodies to throw at helping with just daily tasks of folks who need that. And we just don't have that type of sprung that we had before. I think we had over 80 volunteers signed up at our CAIR network within, I think, a matter of a weekend. And then we had numbers going up. And then since then, it's harder to pull folks. And I think it's important that we speak very loudly about that in this moment, because ICE is still continuing to take people. They're still targeting people. And on top of that, I think folks who've done anything, whether it's patrolling or marshaling or supporting or none of those people are going to go away if we can give them meaningful work or meaningful things that they can get involved. And I think that's the missing link in the next steps, meaningful work, both short term and as well as long term on issues like immigration reform. I think this is the time for us and to call for a national call for immigration reform. Not to say that that the 26th election will drive and with this president, but there may be the willingness to push us into that frame, because we started this particularly in 2025 with I was on a national call, and I literally had people saying they have been told that they're not going to talk about immigration. Immigration is a lost cause. It lost the election because of the border. So many people felt defeated that they felt that the immigration issue had to be on the back burner. And now we've got an opportunity to actually win. We are the only community that has actually stopped Trump's administration. Not only stopped them, but quicksand them. We literally stopped them, fired Nome and Bovino, all of that. And we've turned the dial back on the fact that whatever plans that they had, whatever other chaos they're going to cause in American streets, they can no longer do that. Not only on top of that, they're also losing the Iran war, meaning that the base on the ground is losing Iran war. This is the time to double down. And that's why I want to echo what Nakima mentioned. The politicians are not going to lead us out of this moment. They are the reason why we are in these moments. Whoever is in leadership at this moment is not how we're going to get out of this. They are the part of the problem. And a lot of times our movements will feel like we need to vindicate their leadership. Their leadership is limited. Their leadership is co-opted. Their leadership is based on what they don't want to say. And I want you to know, like, just the moment when they came to reality, everybody who supported Fry now woke up to realize in Minneapolis, he doesn't give a damn about residents. He cares more about landlords and tenants than anything else. He protected the police and not, while Brandon Johnson in Chicago is talking about arresting people. And we have a mayor here who said in a campaign, I don't know what to do. Right. So, and then the moment came, the moment he literally opened the back door to say, I don't know what to do. Right. And then Minneapolis residents still gave him the power to come back.
Oh, but he cursed on TV, Jaylani, don't you know?
He dropped, well, he dropped the F-bomb and then
Bob, Rudy
yeah,
doo.
he dropped the
So
F-bomb and then did this whole BS. But anyways, I'll get off my soapbox there. Thank you.
No,
the,
thank
the
you.
analogy I heard while talking to my city council woman about the eviction extension is at this point, the trans-owned sex toy store has raised almost as much money as the city has for rent relief.
Yes.
The store that was almost out of business last year and could barely pay their own rent has moved $900,000 of money. The politicians have failed us with some exceptions. I mean, like Jason Chavez, Elliot Payne, like those two have
Right,
done
Mary
amazing
Moriarty
work.
too. I would argue
Yes,
our
yeah,
county
Mary
attorney.
Moriarty,
There-
Keith
there are-
Ellison.
Yeah,
But-
there are some really good ones out there, but
Yep.
I think we are still stuck in the sense that public policy will be like the people have spoken, so now the politicians will do something. Politicians are waiting for this moment. This is the moment they win. This is the moment no action is good for them because they don't want to do anything. When the moment is hot, they're all running around with their head cut off and acting like they're going to do something and making speeches when we know we need policy and actual handcuffs on killer cops. And instead, oh, please in North Minneapolis, be quiet, go home, let us whatever. And then 2 months later, we find out that the freaking FBI was lying, as we all said, about what those two individuals did to Julio's Castillos. But anyways, the point, I think, to go back to Chris's point, I think this is a moment that this is the time, this is the hardest time to do something because people feel like they need a little break, but also this is the time to like double down. And I think Minnesotans, we're no longer a flyover state. We need to carry the mantle and the stick and say that if we have to burden it, then all America needs to at least listen to us. And so I really appreciate this forum. We need to have a lot of more of these forums. People need to hear about us, be inspired by us. But at the same time, also, we actually need to say the things that need to happen. This is the time for immigration reform, and this is the time for reckoning for police accountability in this country. And those two things came packaged together. In one envelope with the murder of Renee and Alex and the other shootings of that happened across this country and the countless people that have died. All of these are interconnected, whether it's MPD or ICE. They're the same type of systems that have historically targeted poor people in this country and taken advantage of by serving the elites. And so whether we talk about the murder of George Floyd or the murder of Renee Good, they're the same envelope in the same system. And I think this is the second awakening. We had the first awakening with the murder of George Floyd, I think, internationally. This is the second awakening because there's still a lot of people in our country who just don't believe. And for the first time, people are looking at Minneapolis for leadership. So this is the time we need to continue to stand up and speak up and do that. So, but thank you, everybody, for that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see a couple of questions here. It looks like, I think, Scott, it looks like your hand was up first.
Yeah, is that true? Ingrid, did you have your hand up before me?
I see Elaine also has your hand up. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and jump on. First of all, thank you all so much. This has just been absolutely astounding. I mean, the whole world was watching what was going on in Minneapolis, and you inspired us in standing up and bringing more and more people forward. I think it's really important, like, for us to be taking home some of these lessons that you taught. One of the big things being that, I believe it was Nakima that placed it back at Mike Brown being killed as like being sort of an impetus. really bringing more and more people forward, carrying on through George Floyd when you really stood up and showed the whole world, about how to fight back. So you had been building this infrastructure. So we're in a moment right now where, there are things people are mobilizing on big scale. So I want to know, there's things like the No Kings movement that's going to be happening on the 28th, where there's going to be most likely there's going to be millions of people out in the streets. What do people in Minneapolis, what do people like you guys say we need to be doing to relate to those kinds of struggles as people are coming forward? Because these are still very dangerous times. I mean, I think that they have hit some kind of setbacks. The war on Iran is probably not, who the hell knows what they were thinking and going at it that way that they did. But there's some openings here is what I'm saying. So I'm just wondering what people think needs to happen. I'll just want to throw one other thing too, is like a member of the National Coordinating Committee for 022. I think that there's something that we need to be doing to amplify the voice of the people that say that we got to stand up for the people that led that righteous church protest.
Hell yeah. Thank you for that. Does anybody want to take that question? I'm thinking, Ted, you and I had a good conversation about some things we're planning to do with that. Ted, you want to talk about it?
Sure. Let me put my camera back on. So I need my glasses on apparently to put my camera back on. Sorry. All right. So before getting to what Michelle just referenced, I think overall what's saying that's critical is that we engage people who are coming out for the first time, people who have not been activated before. There's a lot of inexperienced people who still think that, say, someone like Jacob Fry or Walls is a hero when they've actually been collaborating and undermining the movements to fight against repression. They are cheering on police at protests when these police are going and not helping citizens as ICE violates their rights or murders them, but in fact are helping ICE. So I think that a key thing that we can all do in a variety of ways, whether it's getting information out on the internet, whether it's handing out flyers, whether it's working with independent journalists, whether it's having panels, but is educating people that Jacob Fry will never save you from ICE or Trump, and no one like him will. Educating people about police accountability. I'm here with my JFA hat on, but I'm also with Twin Cities Coalition for Justice, and we work for police accountability and community control of the police. And so we've been engaged in these issues. And as Toshira and Akima said, what ICE is doing is just an extension of the militarized, non-accountable, violent policing that we've all been dealing with all along. So I think that education and sharing information is incredibly important. I think making sure that people are ready to fight for the election matters. I don't care for electoral politics. I don't care for most Democrats, but the reality is if this election is stolen, we won't have any more elections, and it's going to make our fights a lot harder. So I think that there's an exception here, and we do fight for that particular issue. Now, for what Michelle had brought up on a more local and direct scale and I think Chris should talk on this because I think Chris is probably has more better information and is more engaged with this. But I think using some of these local networks that we have and starting to use that for a variety of things. Mutual aid was mentioned. We've also had discussions around Cop Watch, and we've also had discussions around can some of this develop into a community protection type thing. That's always a concern. You don't want to turn into a violence interrupter group, which is itself a non-accountable policing group. We don't want that. But if this could really be a thing where people could contact these networks for like minor dispute things without involving the police, mental health issues, complaints about noise, not bringing someone violently trained with a gun into the mix and having community work together. Michelle has a very good story about the Powderhorn neighborhood doing that in the past. I think that that is a particularly good thing. I think what some people have said here about activating those networks for actual activist work and response to political issues is also something we should follow through on. And I will stop there because I think some other folks should talk on this.
Thanks. We're all, one of the things that I know we're going to do is we're going to go to those No Kings events, and we're going to have material and information available to people, because some of these people want to do more. They're gravitating to this stuff because it's what they know about and it's what they can hear about. This is very big organizing. A lot of people come out to it. It's very good that way. But we want to make space, for people who want to take up things in a more powerful way. And so just even being there and talking to people and not acting like, oh, well, those people are not as radical as thou, and, this and that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of silly. So, we should be working with people where they're at and bringing them along to do more and educating them, like Ted talked about, with making them understand that ICE and the cops are the same, and that the cops have not saved us. They're not going to save us. Neither is our mayor, neither are these other politicians, that we need to save us. And this is what it looks like. So I think that's really, really important. And I see a question from Elaine and then Ella. Elaine?
Hi. Yes, thank you. My name is Elaine Simons. I am an impacted family from Washington State, and I'm part of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. WCPA came out of the wake of George Floyd. So what happened in Minneapolis, and I've probably been there at least 4 or 5 times in the last 7 years, we learned a lot. We learned about what can happen and what can go wrong. And one of the things that came out of that are our work as impacted families. There's about 20 of us strong that have all lost loved ones to police brutalities. And that is, we have made laws and changes that are now being implemented. We have an investigation team where the Attorney General has an independent office that opens up old cases. Like I was hearing Toshira talking, bringing up old cases that didn't get a fair look. We also tomorrow, and we are so proud of this, the governor is signing the mask bill, which is that federal agents and police officers will not be able to wear a mask unless it's in some other capacity, like COVID back in 2020 or something. We also have the frock cameras are going to be going away, which was a real big thing because that was into marginalized communities, kind of like what Weed and Seed was back in the early 2000s and 1900, late 1900s. Never mind. So there's been a lot of stuff happening here on a local level that also could be lent or passed on a national level. And that's the thing that I have a pet peeve with, is a lot of our laws are state laws and not federal laws. And as somebody who has benefited my family, we did a voters initiative, which was because we couldn't get a bill. We got something on the ballot called I-940. And that was to remove the idea of malice, that another reasonable police officer in a similar situation, would they have murdered and killed someone? And in our case, my foster son's killer got 16.8 years just this last year for killing Jesse, who was having a crisis, a mental health crisis. So within 36 seconds of contact, Jesse was dead. And so this 3-time killer is no longer on the police force. We also have a decertification process where we are able to get police officers decertified. We also have commissioners that are made up of impacted family members that sit on committees to do oversight. And so what I'm trying to say to you is you guys are an exemplary of what we has taken and ran with. And so I just truly believe that even though a lot of people don't believe in reform and working in bills and working with the police, I mean, we have to sit at the table and have those kind of conversations. Our sheriff bill we just passed, and that is the biggest bill that these sheriffs have now new criterias. They have to be 25 years old. They have to go through a certain type of scrutiny. And Sheriff Skank, if you ever take a look at what he did, he took up almost, I think it was 4.5 hours of yelling and swearing at our Senate about this bill, saying that if it passes, he will tell his police officers, wear those masks, and he made a fool of himself, and he's the first one that's going to go down. So we're just, I talked a little long-winded, but I just wanted to let you know what's happening all the way in Washington State. And, I sat for 7 years waiting for that trial. And just in closing, sometimes I was alone in that courtroom across from the guy that killed my son. And there was nobody sitting there with me on my side, but he was union strong, mayor strong, chief of police strong. And if I was to say anything, when you hear of a family going to trial, please show up for them. Don't let them sit alone and be intimidated and put there alone in that room. If you have the time to be out there on the streets and you're protesting and you have time for all that other stuff, then you need to make time to be in that courtroom, because that is the most loneliest place to be day in and day out. I think I was there for 6 weeks, and I don't know how many days I was alone in there. So I just want to thank you guys. I love you, Michelle and Toshira and all of you. I've met you, Kathy. Thank you for just being here and making this platform available.
Thank you, Elaine. I will tell you that I think it's really important to look at every opportunity to make changes. At the time that George Floyd was murdered, our post board, which is our state licensing board for cops, did not have the power to be able to take away their licenses. So literally, while these guys were waiting to go to trial for the murder of George Floyd, they could have gotten another job with another police department in the state if somebody would have hired them. So literally, this was ridiculous to us. And basically, so the post board rule was that you had to have been convicted of a felony before they could take your license away. And at that point, we wouldn't have cared because they would be in prison. So that is just stupid. We got that changed, and now the cops have a professional standard. One of the most important rules of that professional standard is that they cannot be members of white supremacist organizations. And believe you me, the cops fought us tooth and nail on that one. But we were able to get that through. And now if cops do something, any law enforcement does something that violates those professional standards, they can have their license pulled. So this is important stuff. And you're right. We have to look for all the opportunities to have impacts, every opportunity, and standing with the families. Absolutely agree with you about that.
And
yeah.
What I love what you said, Michelle, this police officer, when he was arrested, he got out on paid administrative house arrest for 4 years. So he was still being paid until
vacation.
Conviction. And
Disgusting.
The thing is, when they took pictures of him, his whole body was tattoos of white supremacy. And the Seattle Times fought for a month and a half to have those put into the trial, and they were redacted. They were not allowed in because they felt that would taint the juror's decision on this killer cop. However, they didn't hesitate to put down my foster son and say, oh, he was on drugs. Oh, he was mentally ill. Oh, and I'm like, really? You're going to, the victim is now the bad person? And so, just to close again, when he showed up for sentencing, it took 6 months because of appeals. He showed up in prison. Where? And one of the mothers leaned over and she says, "It looks like he's already been beaten up." And I started laughing, and I've never used, I try not to be emotional, but I laughed out loud. I said, "Those are his tattoos." Because for the first time, people were seeing his tattoos. And so that to me was very important and very, very, it was important. And then he stood up, turned to them once the sentencing went through and says, "I love you. I love you. Thank you for being here for me." And that was the first time we've heard him speak out. And we all were just like, wow, okay, y'all, you're going down. So thank you.
So thank you. I did see a hand with Ella, and then we are getting to the end of our time together. So we kind of have to wrap up. But Ella, did you still want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'll still go. Here, I'll try to keep it quick. I just want to say thank you so much. It's always such a privilege to be able to be a part of these calls, and everybody here had such wisdom to share tonight. It was really cool. I live out in Burnsville, so I moved out of the cities the summer before everything started happening here, and I've been rebuilding my networks since moving. I wanted to ask what tools you guys find helpful in connecting the dots with people who have the right ideas but get afraid of the word reform, and how to continue those conversations without, I don't know. There's a lot of discourse over whether or not that's worth our time to engage in, and I want to hear your perspective on it, just plain and simple.
Sure. Anybody on the panel want to respond, or anybody else?
I'll jump in. I completely agree with you. And in fact, I was mentioning this multiple times. I think right now there is a lot more unity around ICE actions. I think some polling had up to 80% Americans believed ICE was not engaging appropriately. And we have a unique opportunity because I think the DHS secretary pick that they have is not, he's probably going to have a hard time with actually making it. But I think I agree with you in the sense that we need to simplify it because this is usually how public policy gets killed. People get caught up in the nuances, and the nuances never make it, and nothing gets done at the end of the day because they get people trapped into some idea of language, what we call it, how we call it, what do we want, how do we want it, what is it work? Oh, we had this bill, we should move it now. No, I think what we want is to get the people to realize that we can't treat human beings the way ICE is treating people. These are our neighbors. These are people who are part of our community. We have a system that has been created to take advantage of immigrant labor, immigrant people. And so we have to speak very generally at the beginning before we get to a moment where we can actually put policy. And I also caution the idea that good policies come only from the Democrats because there's a book actually by a Republican who ran for president from Texas called Will Hurd, I believe. I don't know what his book is about. But anyways, pretty much he's a Republican who mentioned that he had the same bill that Democrats had, but the Democrats didn't want to touch it because the Republican had. At the end of the day, at the start, it's about fixing it. And I think that was the thing that made sense to me. How do we just say fix it rather than say reform or say, we want a pathway to citizenship for everybody. There's certain languages that, right? But I think if we move in the right direction, we have the push to eventually get what we can realize. But if we're not even moving in that direction, right, and it's still a faraway idea. I even had a conversation on a national call with some congressional leaders who kept saying, well, we're going to have to revisit this in 28. Hell no. Like, no. I'm sorry. That's your timeline. Ain't in my timeline. Like, we want to push the idea now because there is a bipartisan support in a way we haven't had. Right. And so in 28, God knows where we will be at and what the world will look like and what will be possible. But for now, we need to do. So I agree with you in the sense that may not be the time to say, well, immigration reform looks like this, or immigration reform looks like that, or it's even reform. But I think the broader language that can get everybody at the table and say, this is not acceptable. These are our neighbors. These are people. And here's the thing, when Metro Surge happened, there was a lot of people who did not support immigrants, who all of a sudden realized they cannot live without them. So, right. And so it was like, oh my God, this happened and this happened. And then think about this. How many businesses didn't give a damn? They would hire you, but they didn't think immigrant labor was so critical to the ecosystem. And the moment that nobody stopped shopping at their stores and their businesses struggled, they start realizing and waking up that this is actually a bigger issue. So I think we are at a moment where a lot more people have the fundamental right feeling that something has to happen. And I agree with you. Those who don't want anything to be done want us to get stuck in the language and the objectivity of what the policy would look like, versus the idea that, oh yes, it is time to fix the damn problem. And I think that's something I think will be more encompassed by more people.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? I think you're just spot on, Jaylani. I want to tell you a real fast story. This isn't like I said, getting into electoral politics or any of that stuff, but we did have a bill here. I wrote a bill called Travis's Law, and it requires 911 call centers to dispatch mental health crisis responders instead of cops to most mental health crisis calls. And that's because 50% of the people that are killed by cops are in the throes of a mental health crisis. So it's a life-saving matter, and I realize some people are like, oh, poo-poo on legislative stuff, but sometimes you need to do it to get things to change. And so I wrote this bill, and the chief proponent of our bill, the chief supporter of our bill on the Senate side at the Minnesota legislature, is a Republican whose brother committed suicide and who understands mental health issues very, very well. And so, I mean, look, there's a lot of really crappy Democrats and there's some really crappy Republicans and all of that. I mean, setting aside the administration, I'm talking about on the local level with politicians, figure out who you can work with and get them to do the work, with you. So I think, what you're saying, Jaylani, is really key, because some of these Democrats are so almost conservative themselves that they will literally try to talk you out of your own goals. So I think you have it exactly right. So I will want to mention one other thing that folks are thinking about, and that is the upcoming midterms and the electoral stuff that's going on. I'm not really way into electoral stuff either, but I agree with Ted that it's extremely important that we pay some attention to this stuff, particularly when they're talking about putting ICE out at they're hiring just jillions of these officers, and they're talking about putting them out at polling places to intimidate people to not go to the polls. And this is about a really truly evil administration, and about a president who doesn't want to spend a minute in prison, and he'll get people killed not to do it. So I mean, I think this guy is he's so incredibly egotistical and so forth and narcissistic that he's willing to, he's going to keep people from voting in order to keep himself and his party in power, to keep him out of prison. So, I mean, whatever analysis you want to apply to it, we cannot allow these people to gut people's right to vote and to intimidate people at the polls by surrounding those polls with ICE agents and so forth. So I think that's a good place for people who are maybe a little bit more into the electoral politics and stuff. That really strikes a nerve with that crowd of folks as well. So like the No Kings people and stuff like that. So we have to look, again, meet people where they are and get them involved where they can be involved. So is there anything else anybody else wants to add? Because we have gone over our time a little bit. I just want to say thank you to our panel members. You all are magnificent people. It's my pleasure to work with you on a daily basis. I love all of you. It's such a great privilege to be able to work with all of you. And honestly, our coalition is powerful, man. When we want something done, we get it done. And that's the beauty of having these working relationships and true love for each other in the community that is ready to stand with each other and make things happen. So thank you all again. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to listen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you too.
I love you, Elaine.
I love you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
nice,
Thank you.
so nice
Thank
to
you.
be
Thank you.
on
Thank
a
you.
call with a whole lot of really fabulous people that are out here doing what you need to do in your community. So thank you again.
Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our amazing speakers. We'll send out the recording of this later. So if you're not getting our emails already, please email oct22national@gmail.com. It's in the chat, oct22national@gmail.com.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Good
Much
night
love.
and peace. I'll lose.